Hello and welcome back to the RevOps Show. As revenue operations has become a hot topic the past 2 years, more organizations are looking to create an actual role for RevOps. What exactly is RevOps? How does RevOps transform into a role? What does creating a RevOps role even look like within your organization? Don't worry, Jess and Doug get into the details today, along with some mistakes companies make when implementing a RevOps role. So sit back, relax, and let's get on with the show.
Jess,
Doug.
you made me go 2 weeks without a RevOps show.
I know, and we're doing this on a Friday afternoon, so it's gonna be real interesting. That is on me.
That's on Jess. We've had quite the RevOps week, wouldn't you say?
We have a lot of conversations.
Done some interesting designs, solved some unique problems.
Absolutely, yep. Which is a good week. That means it was a good week.
Yeah, you look tired, Jess. Come on, let's
I'm
get
tired.
Come on, the audience is ready for RevOps. This is the RevOps show.
Let's do this. Let's do it.
There we go. You know what, Jess? I want you to come up with a RevOps cheer.
Oh, we don't want me doing that.
Come on, we need to come up with like the, like maybe a secret handshake, something like that. So only RevOps people, real RevOps people know.
We'll see. All right. Today.
You're not gonna let me small talk anymore?
No. Let's get moving.
All right, let's go.
Get moving. I want to talk about creating a RevOps role within your organization.
I don't think you should do it. I think you should just hire us.
All right, sweet. Solved. End of the podcast. Thanks, guys. No, as RevOps is becoming increasingly popular, I think more organizations are looking to create an actual role for RevOps. So I want to talk about that. And first and foremost, I've got possibly a huge question.
Uh-oh.
What is RevOps?
Okay, so I knew you were going to ask this question.
Yeah.
And I debated about whether or not I wanted to open up some of the presentations we've done on what is RevOps to share, what is our previously thought out definition of RevOps. And I decided not to do that.
Okay.
But I would encourage you, anybody listening, we've got a blog post, what is revenue operations? We've got a webinar on demand on launching, integrating successful RevOps function. It kind of covers it from a more, initially in a kind of an academic, really having thought through it from a technical standpoint, thinking through the implications and ramifications of things. And I bring this up because I think the question, what is RevOps? I think it's a mysteriously important question. Because however you define RevOps, that's going to have a disproportionate influence. Whether you define it, fully or not, whether you articulate the definition or not, and that's my concern. I think one of the motivations we had to do the show is that RevOps is now being thrown around. I mean, it's this year's ABM conversation or whatever, right? That it doesn't mean anything anymore increasingly, and I think that I know I've been interviewing RevOps leaders, and one of the things I'm finding is there's not a clear definition of what is the role, what does it mean, and that is damaging both to people working within RevOps, but it also puts that RevOps role in a you're kind of subject to the winds. I've always been a fan of, we can't control our winds, but we can control the set of our sail. I think you need to define it to so that expectations can be managed effectively, so that resources can be allocated and used effectively, et cetera. So what is RevOps? RevOps is a holistic function orchestrating all facets of your market-facing revenue/customer acquisition and expansion, people, structure, teams, activities, etc. For the purpose of enabling the organization to increase its likelihood of achieving its objectives with either lower costs and or less risk.
All right.
And so if the RevOps function isn't, so I always say that the keyword in RevOps is rev, not ops.
Yeah.
Right, revenue is the keyword, not operations. I see a lot of places where operations kind of becomes the keyword. I mean, I've heard there is a growing group that I've seen talking about how the function should report to the COO.
Yeah, we're gonna get to that.
Okay. So the objective, it plays a role in managing the trade-offs. You can only have trade-offs when you're seeking an objective. And, and listeners, if they haven't figured it out, will know soon that one of my go-to phrases is the juice worth the squeeze?
Yeah.
And how do we get more juice for the squeeze? That's what RevOps is for. How do we get more juice for the squeeze? Which shows itself as lower cost and or less risk. Now, that might mean acceleration, right? So, and by the way, I believe that cost is a relative term. I think cost is not an absolute term, right? So it's really, how much chunk out of every dollar do we need to spend to be able to grow?
Right.
Right. Because if we, when we're twice as big, my costs are going to be higher, right? In terms of my line.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Right. So if I get there faster, which I think is what is about eliminating friction, increasing velocity. We talk about that all the time. Yeah. You get there faster. Well, why does getting there faster matter? Well, it lowers cost, it lowers risk, mm-hmm. right? And so I think that one of the other that's another element around that RevOps function, and it's what brings the complementary approach to what is the sales team and the sales leader and the marketing leader and the demand gen leader and the success account management leader, et cetera. How do those mindsets complement each other? So that's kind of my big answer to your big question.
It was a big question. We had a big answer. So how does that translate into a specific role within my organization, or a role or roles? Because maybe it's more than one role. But how do I translate that into hiring a person?
Well, so one thing I'm going to call out is that you just use two words as synonyms that aren't synonyms.
Which two words?
Role and person.
Okay, sorry.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So how does that translate into roles? I mean, to some degree, I would say, how does, if I were to ask you the question, what is sales?
Mm-hmm.
And then, okay, well, how does that translate into a role or roles?
Right.
Right.
What do you want it to do?
So I think, and by the way, if you're a $1 billion revenue company growing at 40% per year, your roles are going to look really different than if you're a $100 million company growing at 10% per year, and everything in between, betwixt, above and beyond. So I don't think that there's one answer. I think strategy and to a large degree structure is, there's too much copycatting going on. And I don't mind. I think it's great to copy kind of a base layout, but
mm-hmm.
but ultimately, your formula is going to be your formula, right? It's your group of people, it's your position, it's your market. It's like, we want to be different. We want to be, we're differentiating. We want to be distinct. And so we're going to copy what Apple does.
Yeah.
Right. So there's an element of, what's going on in your company, what's the barrier in your company. It's one of the reasons why I'm a big fan of frameworks, right? I think that there's a tendency that we jump into the discipline way too early. Oh, what was I can't remember who it was that I was listening to, and they used the word capability the way I use capability. I think it was like, it had something to do with medical, but
mm-hmm.
they like, I don't view things as hiring people. I view it as hiring capabilities, right? And people have heard me say that, we don't buy technology, we don't license technology, we hire technology.
Right.
Technology is a capability. So I want to know what capabilities do I need, what mix at what level to be able to achieve what my objectives are. And so we have a tendency to jump into the muck too early. Like in the same way, technology drives the business process rather than business process driving technology. The business process needs to drive the job description. The job description should not drive the business process. And so it's really hard to, you end up coming into a chicken or egg element. I get that in the abstract, that's a very hard thing to do. Like, how do I define which to what? And that's why I'm a fan of frameworks, right? Frameworks kind of take the colloquialisms and the jargon and those other elements. They take it out of play. And that's why we created the revenue acceleration framework. And really, the underlying driver of the revenue acceleration framework, we actually developed that. We refined it a little bit. It's been amazing how well version 1 has stuck. But we created that in a scenario where we were talking to somebody, trying to get them to understand why do they need this function called revenue operations.
Yeah.
And so, like far too often we start off talking about revenue operations from okay, well, what's the job description for revenue operations? And that, when you do that, you end up defining the role by its most dynamic, frequent stimulus, which is one reason why, managing tech. I think people didn't like being called Salesforce admins or Marketo admins, and so they said no, I'm revenue operations, right? And you see a lot of that everything is defined as. Now I do believe that the massive growth of technology and the utilization of technology is one of the things that brought the need for this to light. But I also want to remind everybody that this is not a new role. This is not a new function. GE's had revenue operations, sales operations, marketing operations for decades. So what the revenue acceleration framework does is it says, okay, well, how do we structure the company so it produces outcomes with consistency, predictability, and scalability? And in that, we talk about what emerged. And by the way, one of the reasons I love the framework is it wasn't a framework that we built to define revenue operations. It was a framework that we built looking at successful companies where the role of revenue operations became really clear. The chasm that we've talked about for years between the strategy and intent of an organization and its execution and performance/results, the chasm that exists between that became really clear in that framework and the role of revenue operations. So how do you define the role? You have to have a strong framework, whether it's the revenue acceleration framework or some other framework, so that what, like, would you build a house without a blueprint?
No.
Right? I know some people probably would, but I don't know that I would recommend living in it. I think they do that in Texas, Jess.
They might.
There's at least a faction of people. We live in a free country. Why do I have to do blueprints?
Wow, we're really going to go off on the Texas tangent.
At any chance. So and then it's, what's the biggest barrier? What's the biggest and I'm sure you'll ask some questions so we can take it a little bit more out of theory to say, okay, that's all well and good, but what do I do tomorrow? We'll kind of get into that. But I do think that, that's how you have to look at it. And that's why before we start doing revenue operations, we do a revenue acceleration assessment and we do a revenue acceleration roadmap, right? Is to begin to create what is that prioritization scheme. I think that one of the disciplines that a strong revenue operations brings is focus on what are you working on, and which means, by the way, a lot of people have a revenue operations function that isn't called revenue operations. It might not even be called operations. It might not even have an operations title. or descriptor, right?
Yeah.
You know, so you know, understanding what's preventing you from getting juice for the squeeze, what would enable you to get more juice from the squeeze, you know, where's the barrier, where's the opportunity, where's the constraint, what's the bottleneck, you know, that's going to drive a lot of how do you translate what is RevOps into a specific role. Again, this is the stuff that everybody wants to skip because it's boring, it's academic, it's
Right.
theoretical. My brain starts to hurt when I think about it.
It's hard.
Yeah, you know, and you know, you got to do the hard work. The more you do the hard work up front, the easier the execution is.
And since you stole the words out of my mouth, that's all fine and good. But what do I do tomorrow?
Well, give me a couple scenarios if you could, because that would at least help.
I'm a mid-sized company. I've got let's not go generic. So I've got 60 sales reps. I have a sales ops person. I feel like I've got all of these pain points in managing databases and processes, and I don't have alignment across my success, sales, and marketing departments.
How big?
Marketing department's 3 people.
Have you ever seen somebody who clearly has lifted weights and their shoulders are hunched forward?
Yes.
Right. That's an example of somebody who has worked their big muscle groups, but underworked their small muscle groups. So they're big. So the muscles in the front, their chest muscles are far stronger than the muscles in the back.
Yeah.
And the reason that the shoulders start to hunch forward is because the muscles in the back aren't strong enough to restrain that, right?
Right.
So, and by the way, I mean, we see this all the time, right? I've seen 80-person sales teams with actually not an official marketing department.
Right.
Not at all infrequently see one. So one thing I'm going to say there is you've got an imbalance between sales and marketing. So okay. Some of the difficulty that you're having is you don't have some of the structures and the foundations and the systems that a robust marketing department would have. And if you've got 60 salespeople, I can tell you that you definitely have the need and the pull for more than 3 marketing people. So there's some of that element where some of the problem that you're having isn't even really a revenue operations discipline problem. You've actually got an imbalance problem, right?
Okay.
You look really strong, but you're actually not. And so what that means is your sales team is probably underperforming, even your best salespeople, because they have to do all of the heavy lifting. You know, what does a good marketing group do? A good marketing group creates, you know, it reduces lift, or creates lift, depending upon whether you want to go with physics or a weightlifting example. So you have some of that. And by the way, that's why I said in my definition, you know, one of the key words about revenue operations for it to be what I'm going to call truly revenue operations, because I'll give the caveat. There are a lot of people that have a sales operations / marketing operations or both.
Yeah.
That when you have that, you know, one reason why was that not enough? Everyone said, well, because of silos. Though I actually know I can say this because he said it on our other podcast, on the Blackline podcast. We had Mark Killens from Drift on, and he talked about the fact that they went to a central revenue operations to eliminate the silos, and they found that it actually created more friction than having sales operations be, you know, having operations for sales, having operations for marketing, et cetera.
Interesting.
So they went quote unquote central, and then broke that out. Now I can tell you that, you know, Drift has, you know, is a very high collaboration, very high interdependent, very high context organization. So again, what you call it doesn't matter. And so, but typically what you see with sales operations, marketing operations, the underlying issue is more that it's, you know, a purely tactical to administrative function. And I've seen people that go, okay, well, this is revenue operations. And I always worry because I'm like, well, you know, just if all you do is change the name, you haven't changed anything, right? And so for me to be like, now we call it technically now strategic revenue operations. We talked about this in the 5 levels of revenue operations. We call it strategic revenue operations because everyone's using the term revenue operations, so we want to create that distinction. What you've just described is a next imbalance.
Okay.
And the next imbalance is the strategic acumen to counterbalance the sales and marketing focus. So like a line mindset is do more, right? So if you think about the flywheel, which is, becoming everyone's popular, and it's a great metaphor for creating growth, for, enabling the juice to be more than the squeeze. The traditional playbook is do more, do more, do more, increase force.
Yep.
Revenue operations is a reduced friction mindset.
Yep.
Which again is lower cost, lower risk, acceleration. And so what's missing is a strategic mindset, a system design mindset, that counterbalances. We talk about the 7 disciplines of revenue operations, and those disciplines are process design, organizational design, behavioral science. Those are elements that are missing in the organization that you talked about. Now, I know I know somebody, and actually, if you look at that function is done by a revenue strategy group at Drift, if I remember what Mark said correctly. If you look at HubSpot's revenue operations team, they did a webinar on this about a year ago where they shared how they were structured, and they have ops people that are more tactically focused, with strategy people working more on the integration orchestration of. I think it's like a 2-to-1, 2 tactical to 1 strategy. At least that's what it was when I heard the webinar. That's what I'm remembering. But that element of what's happening in that organization, and it's not because the people aren't capable of it. It's because the situation makes it incapable. Is there's no one there that is taking a truly holistic viewpoint.
Yeah.
Right? Because if I'm on the head of sales, I might have the ability to have a strategic view, but I'm the head of sales, so that's going to prioritize everything.
Right.
Right.
Sure.
And so that counterbalance, that's what's missing. And so it's a lot there. It's a whole lot of addressing the invisible. One of the reasons that company probably hasn't succeeded in eliminating the disruption and the turbulence continues to get bigger is more because they don't, like, reduced friction is seeing subtraction. Increasing force is seeing everything through addition. So that mindset isn't there to and the result of that is that they're working on everything. Right. As opposed to, like, when I coached hitters, you can only work on one thing, right? And so what you want to do is you want to find the most foundational thing that you're working on. What's the thing that if we work on now will impact the most things that need work?
Okay.
Right. And so in the same way that everybody loves SaaS and recurring revenue, because you get that hockey stick growth curve, you get the benefit of compounding. What strategic revenue operations does, what that role does, is it views things through the lens of the same compound improvement on process improvement. Right? You start off and we're going to work on this one thing, and someone says, well, that's not enough. We got more that we have to work on. It's like, that we're going to get to where we need to be faster by figuring out what is that order of how are we working on things, where is that trade-offs, where and how do we allocate our resources. Now, in an organization that size, you're going to be able to work on more than one thing technically, but you can only have one top priority, right? You can only, and so those elements and picking that into it, revenue operations also plays a little bit more to a longer game mindset, right? And so it's more not just what am I going to do that solves this today. I think one of the reasons why revenue operations is needed is because so much of what's been done has been to solve the problem of today, to make the problem that we're dealing with today easier to deal with. And you just build up lots and lots of process debt. that strategic revenue operations mindset is thinking about the long game, is thinking about, okay, what impact does this have on other things? That also traces it down to, okay, well, what's the real cause here? Which is the next element why companies don't create that improvement is they're they're not doing a causal analysis. And sometimes the causal analysis is super duper complex, and GE has teams of people that take months to do that. But it doesn't have to be. Like we're big fans of the iterative approach to that, but it's still,
Yeah.
I wrote the blog, a couple of weeks ago. You got to start off with the problem statement, and nobody starts off with the problem statement. And
Yeah.
by the way, I skip the problem statement every time that someone doesn't remind me, or I don't have a system enforcing to skip the problem statement, because that's
Right.
just what we do. And so what that revenue operations mindset does is it says, okay, let's be sure that we have a clear idea on what the problem is. And so there's that strategic role, there's that strategic capability that's needed. Now I'm going to say something that could be interpreted as self-serving, but just because it's self-serving doesn't mean that it's not true. There are two ways that you can go about, really three, that you can go about filling that capability.
Mm-hmm.
You can hire somebody, and a company like that is going to hire a head of revenue operations. That's going to be their head of revenue operations.
Right.
You can utilize outside resources to cover a core element of it and hire somebody that's more, or not hire anybody. You could outsource it.
Yeah.
You could hire, bring in outside ability and hire somebody at more of an intermediate level that's still more of an implementer than a strategic designer, if you will. And so, again, it's hire somebody, outsource it, hybrid it.
Yeah.
Right? The part that's self-serving is the company that you just described going to hire somebody for that role, unless they are on a high trajectory growth, unless they're at 60 salespeople because they've been in business for 18 months, or they started their growth initiative 18 months ago,
Yeah.
and they've raised $15 million,
Mm-hmm.
right? And by the way, even there, it's going to be hard.
Right.
You're not going to hire the person that's actually capable of that. It's the same mistake I see mid-market companies when they hire the head of sales, or they end up hiring somebody who's really a big game salesperson,
Right. Yeah.
Who's tired of carrying a bag.
Yeah.
Who now wants to be VP. And again, the reason is, think about it. If you're the person that's got the capability to solve complex problems and think through complex problems, the thing that's interesting is you have those complex problems, but you don't have those complex problems every day.
Right.
Right. You really kind of have the complex problem that's just been sustaining, and there's, right, your playground's not big enough. It's almost that you don't have enough riddles. And also, if you don't have a revenue operations team of 10 people or more, then you're hiring somebody who needs to be thinking and designing and then also doing. Well, the people who are really, really good at thinking and designing tend to want to spend more time thinking and designing.
Yeah.
Right. And so where are they going to go? They're going to go to the places where they can think and design. And oh, by the way, from the power of their thinking and designing, because there's 8 or 10 people in a position to implement, it magnifies. So there's a bigger, more powerful playground. It's more challenging. And oh, by the way, that organization can probably pay more.
Yeah.
Right. And so what you end up doing is you end up hiring, and I don't mean this negatively, but you end up hiring somebody who's of an intermediate level, who maybe has contributed to some of this, but there's a big learning curve between being a key contributor and being the initiator, and trust me, I've got the blood to prove it, and the broken bones to prove it, that we, so that you end up under hiring the position, and you don't get the kick that you need, and that is why I say you got to define it as capabilities.
Mm-hmm.
And connect the role to the capability, not the role to the people.
Yep. Gotcha. So we talked a little bit about strategy and structure, tactical versus strategic. So a little bit of diametrically opposed capabilities, to steal your term. So what is, keeping that in mind, what is RevOps typically responsible for? Because you're talking about things that don't necessarily go together when you talk about the capabilities of RevOps and the RevOps role.
So what do you mean? I'm not following you completely.
So like when we think about what is RevOps responsible for, are they responsible for all these things? Is this kind of one role, or let me rephrase. Is this really one role that we're talking about, or is it multiple roles? You talked about the HubSpot kind of posture of having operations people who are responsible for the tactical and strategic people who are responsible for the strategic.
Well, to be clear, it's multiple roles that may or may not manifest itself in an organization as multiple people.
Okay.
Just like sales is multiple roles, right? When I started Imagine and I was one person, that was the company, right? I was one person and I was the CEO. That's a role. I was the COO. I was the head consultant. I was the junior consultant. From a sales standpoint, I was the finder.
Yeah.
I was the provoker. I was the engager. I was the expander. Right? All those roles were present, right? And I wore lots of different hats, along the way. So revenue operations is a lot of roles, just like marketing is multiple roles, even if you have one person. And I think in most organizations, most marketers in mid-market companies fill more than one role.
That's true.
Right. I mean, because look at look at Nike's marketing department.
Yeah.
Right. Look at Apple's marketing department. I bet you they've got 10 people doing what is part of one person's job at your company.
Yeah.
Right.
I was that marketer.
Right. Yeah. And so again, so like to me, there's multiple. And by the way, that's another reason why I think in this place where we are, and self-serving, but not necessarily untrue, why utilizing outside resources can be better. Because, for example, and I'm not meaning for this to be a commercial, but when we come into an organization and we're supporting them on the revenue operations, they're not getting one person, they're getting multiple people, where we're able to bring the benefit of that more individual focus to what's happening in that discipline, that leads to greater mastery, greater efficiency, greater velocity. Right. But it's mixed together for them. So they're getting the pieces that they need, based upon what's happening. And you couldn't. And you know what? We're typically, when we do that, we're typically going to, at best, equal to hiring somebody. Right. We're probably a little bit more expensive than hiring somebody. Right.
Yeah.
That's one reason why people sometimes are afraid to move forward with us, is that, but again, what we're doing is we're supporting multiple roles, freeing up, et cetera. And that's where you get the fidelity. That's where you get the expansion of that. So yeah, it is multiple roles. Is it multiple people? That really depends on, the size, the structure, the cash flow, et cetera.
Gotcha. Yeah. So I said we're gonna hit on this. Who does RevOps normally report to?
I think it's too early to answer that question.
Okay.
I mean, if we're saying normally being what's the norm of companies that have revenue operations functions, I've seen revenue operations report to COOs, which, by the way, again, makes no sense to me. If somebody wants to join us for a RevOps show to support that, and by the way, I'm open to learning something that I'm not aware of. But that doesn't make any sense.
I don't want to go down a rabbit hole, but why does that make no sense to you? Because I think that, and I know that you're saying the primary term is revenue, but I don't think that's how a lot of people think of it. I think they see operations in there and they think, okay, they should report to the COO.
Then they're wrong.
But why are they wrong?
Well, it goes back to the definition, right? It's responsible for achieving the customer-facing, the market-facing, customer/revenue acquisition expansion objectives.
Gotcha. Okay.
right? And
Yep.
I mean, if you think about it, and this goes back to, I don't even know if they still teach us at business school because it's so old, but you have your income statement. And if you look at, if you were to take an organizational chart, you could map out the organizational chart along the lines of that income statement, right? You've got your income oriented positions, you've got your expense or cost oriented positions,
Yeah.
right? Sales, and theoretically sales and marketing, is income. They generate the income. And by the way, I didn't say this, Peter Drucker said this, and Peter Drucker is a hell of a lot smarter than me, and probably a hell of a lot smarter and knowledgeable than everybody listening to this program put together. So, right, he used the term marketing and innovation is the only revenue generating activity. He used sales in his definition of marketing as a subset, right?
Mhm.
Because he's using the actual strategic definition of marketing: people, place, etc. Product promotion, and everything else is an expense. Now, people talk about that like that's a bad thing. Are you a cost center? Is your marketing department a cost center or a revenue center? Huh? I don't know what that means, right? Because, by the way, I mean, marketing is definitely a cost center.
Yeah.
Because I know it, because I get to write checks every 15 days, at least, if not for other things, but let alone our tech stack, right?
Right. Yeah.
But what does that cost do? That cost creates capability. That capability is what I sell, right? So even if you're selling a product and you've got, your head of distribution, well, if you didn't have your head of distribution, you wouldn't be able to sell the product. That's part of the product that you're selling, right?
Right.
But again, if I'm on the operations side, I'm on a cost side. I've got a different agenda. And if my operations side and my revenue side, if my head of revenue and my head of operations are thinking the same thing,
you got a problem.
then I should probably call that person the president or the CEO or something, because I don't need both of them if they're thinking the same thing.
Okay.
It is that operations should have a restraining element on sales, right?
Yeah.
Sales should have a pulling. They should be pulling on each other. So if you make it an operations function, then it becomes more about managing cost. And then you become Starbucks before Howard Schultz came back, right? These things make sense, but the trade-off is, and this also, by the way, is where I say cost is a relative number, right? I'm trying to produce more profit at the end. I'm trying to produce more cash flow at the end. I see this happening. I know there's a lot of people, huge efficiency nuts, lower the cost of acquisition, lower the cost of acquisition, lower the cost of acquisition.
Yeah.
And I look at it and I say, so you're at an 8% customer acquisition cost, which is like freakishly amazing. Awesome. How are you doing that? But if your customer acquisition costs were 20%, you'd still be performing above. And I'm using an example. It's a real example, right? 20% doesn't necessarily work for everybody. But
right.
In this case, it's at they're at 8%. If they were at 20%, they would be performing. They would be exceeding their targets. They'd be blowing away cost of capital. They hit all the, and I mean, I can't help. I would love to get in to have the debate with somebody that would tell me how. Now, I'm not saying spend money just to spend money,
mm-hmm.
but if I were to intelligently do things that caused that doubled my cost of customer acquisition, so now I'm at 16%, which, by the way, is still 20% below that 20% threshold. How would that not enable me to gain more ground faster? And by the way, if I'm on the operations side, that operations mindset is going to be, hey, let's lower the cost structure, lower the cost structure, lower the cost structure. A revenue operations mindset is saying, hey, you know what, guys, we're way below here.
Yeah.
What I don't want you to do, I want my cost of customer acquisition to be as low as it can be within constraints. But if I just talk about lower, then someone who has this idea, I know for us, by the way, if you look at our customer acquisition costs right now, oh my God, we're blowing them. We're not going to cover off the ball.
Yeah.
We're in the process now of looking to hire a salesperson.
Yeah.
Got to tell you, I almost changed the comp plan for our salesperson for the role that we're going to look to hire, because the impact it's going to have on this salesperson, the business that they bring in, if they're successful, let alone not successful, the customers they bring in are going to cost us twice
Right.
what our customer acquisition cost is right now. Well, I'm like,
Yeah.
why do I want to do? Well, so I began to tinker with, well, what if I change the percentages to this?
Yeah.
And then, luckily I've got what I like to think of as a strategic revenue operations mindset. I looked at, well, wait a second, that's going to change the caliber of person that we're going to have. And wait a minute, this comp model was built on, what our economic model was. So yeah, it's still profitable.
Yeah.
It's still right. And I'm like, oh, okay. And I reminded myself of that. But I'll tell you what, if you have it reporting to revenue, if you have it reporting to an operations function, I promise you, you're not going to have that other piece.
Okay.
And that's where things begin, it's a fine line between reducing friction and creating more friction in an effort to reduce friction.
It's a lot of friction.
Right. So it is a revenue role that is, and so what is revenue operations successful? The before and after on revenue capture and on gross profit. And by the way, I think revenue operations is responsible for gross profit. Operations is responsible for net profit.
Okay.
Right. So there's two different, if I'm reporting to operations, I'm now in the net. I'm now in the G&A. Right. And so those are the places where, I think for the most part, operations should have more of an efficiency mindset. And if I leave too much to operations, then operations is going to efficiency us right into the belly of commoditization. Right. And our distinction and our differentiation, by the way, differentiation has cost.
Yeah.
So we efficiency ourselves to eliminate our distinction, which then all of a sudden we begin to generate a little bit less revenue, or people jump out, or wait, we now have to give a little bit more of a discount, or wait, there's a little bit less word of mouth, or wait, right?
Yeah.
It now puts pressure on our cost structure because all of a sudden revenue growth wasn't where it was supposed to be, or wasn't at the same rate it was, which means we got to put a little bit more pressure to reduce costs. And before we know it, the pursuit of the right decision reinforces this vicious loop. That's why.
So who should they report to? Because I think we're clear that COO is probably not who they should report to.
Well, again, I think it depends on the size, scope, and structure of the organization. So in a full, like in the company that you talked about, it's actually a hard one because I don't know that company, given its breadth and depth, they should report to the same person that the head of sales and that the head of marketing report to. I'm going to say that you may be doing strategic things, but you are not a strategic RevOps role if you are reporting below the level that the top person in sales and the top person in marketing report to. So in a forward-leaning organization, that is a chief revenue officer or a chief customer officer. But if there isn't a chief revenue officer, chief customer officer, who do the head of sales and the head of marketing report to, which is interesting because some people will say, well, I'm the head of sales and marketing, so quote unquote, the head of marketing reports to the head of sales and marketing. Now, by the way, I'm not saying it's not out there. I can't recall the last time I saw a head of marketing, right? They're a marketing person, that's what they do, that's what they are, and they say, hey, we're going to make you the VP of sales and marketing. Sales is now going to report to you.
Yeah.
95 to 99.9% of the time, when you see a VP of sales and marketing, you have the head of sales that's overseeing sales and marketing.
Right.
And so if you have that, then you actually don't have a head of marketing, right? You have a director of marketing. You may have a VP of marketing reporting to the VP of sales and marketing.
Yeah.
Right? But what you've done here is you've made yourself overly angled to the sales side. That's the 60 salespeople, 3. By the way, I'd love a VP of sales and marketing to tell me if they look at this differently. My sense is, okay, it's time to hire somebody. Do you hire another salesperson or do you hire a marketing person? I think that you're going to have a 90-10 bias, maybe 80-20, that head of sales and marketing is going to hire sales. Is going to prioritize hiring sales, not hiring marketing, and that's where that imbalance comes from. So if you have marketing reporting to the head of sales, then that head of operations, that head of RevOps, ideally is a parallel to the head of the VP of Sales and Marketing, and reports to whoever the VP of Sales and Marketing reports to, which is probably the CEO. Now, I know that that's got some political ramifications to it. So there are aspects where that may not happen.
Yeah.
So it ends up reporting to VPs of sales, to the VP of Sales and Marketing. When that happens, you in essence have made that VP Sales and Marketing a de facto chief revenue officer.
Yeah.
And what I would say to somebody in the role of head of RevOps reporting to that person, I would use my powers of influence to introduce the point of view around what is a CRO and work to help broaden what that perspective is. And by the way, I think one of the first jobs of that head of revenue operations for that mythical 60 salesperson company that we talked about is to teach the value of greater balance through to teach what are the different capabilities that are necessary. Because by the way, I would tell you that you could cut, if you were cost constrained, I could cut that sales organization by 10 to 20%, take those resources, allocate it into revenue operations and probably some marketing function, maybe have a little bit of money left over on the side, and my sales organization would produce more than so I could take the 60 down to say 45, fund my revenue operations and marketing more fully, and my 45 will produce greater economic impact than my 60 reps were producing before. Now that's got a political take because headcount goes down and VP sales love headcount, but but beginning to teach that. And so what I know is I'm not expecting that anyone's going to cut their 60 to 45 to do this.
Right.
But it does definitely show that, well, now that next sales turnover, maybe we don't when a sales rep turns over, that sales rep is replaced most often without even thinking about it. Now maybe it's like, okay, well, we don't necessarily have to replace that salesperson. We can, and that's how you begin to build that resource allocation to support what you're trying to do.
That makes sense. I think we have time for one more. So what's the right type of skill set or background for the RevOps? We'll say capability. What's the right type of person look like for these roles?
I can't tell you how much I don't like that question.
Why?
Because it's kind of like, well, what does a successful salesperson look like? And I can tell you that a large chunk of the most successful salespeople I've ever met don't look like successful salespeople. By the way, what does a successful salesperson look like? So given, what does a successful salesperson look like? Would you choose an introvert or an extrovert?
Well, I'm an extrovert, but I know that's probably not where you're going to go because we've had this conversation.
Right, an introvert, a good introvert will outsell a good extrovert by multiple.
Yeah.
Right. So when the question is, what's a good X look like? We create stereotypes, which is, and what I mean by stereotypes is we reinforce this element of sameness that it's showing itself in a lot of different places in business, and what you're doing is, you're basically doing the equivalent of creating an RFP. You're asking the question, how can we maximize the probability of making an average choice? Now, don't get me wrong, making average choices is not bad. It's actually, for those behavioral scientists out there, that's called satisficing. Right? Because here's what maximizing the probability of making an average choice does. It minimizes the probability of making a bad choice.
Yep.
Right? But in minimizing the probability of making a bad choice, you are also minimizing the likelihood of making a great choice. And so if you're looking to change the course and speed, which is what a strategic role should be doing, right, based upon our definition, then there is no one type. Because I can tell you, I think I'm pretty good RevOps. I think I am at this point.
You're all right. That was a joke. You are.
But I don't look. I look like a good sales rep.
Yeah, for sure.
For the most part, I do have an exception. I have two exceptions.
Introvert.
No. My two exceptions are, I'm shorter and fatter. Let me tell you what, I don't know if you know this or not. My first dream job when I was getting out of college, I wanted to sell for Carnival Cruise Lines.
Oh, we talked about
Right? I didn't get a job. I didn't look the type.
Yeah, right.
Right.
Yep.
And by the way, when you think salesperson, what do you think? Don Draper.
Yeah.
Right. I am. Yeah. It's taken me a while to be comfortable saying this. I do not look like Don Draper. Right. I'm a little bit more Columbo than I am Don Draper. Now, by the way, I'll tell you that Columbo will actually outsell Don Draper. But again, Don Draper looks like a successful.
He looks like a salesperson.
Columbo does not.
That's correct.
The second place where I violate what looks like I talk too much.
No.
No, but I talk too much in sales interactions. Like if you look at the percentage.
That was sarcasm.
I know. I'm saying this for the listeners because they haven't heard me sell, most of them.
Yeah.
But you know what's interesting? When I've been surveyed and assessed by the people that I've sold to, do you know what one of my top attributes is?
Being a good listener.
Being a great listener.
Yeah.
Right. So again, if I looked the part of successful salesperson, I don't know that Imagine would exist.
Why is that?
Well, I would have sold for Carnival Cruise Lines.
Okay.
I would have probably, at some point I would have gotten a promotion, and I would have probably gone down, a very, very different route. And so the move to the family business that I had, the move to things that began to broaden, I began to play with different things. And what I really am is a hodgepodge of a whole bunch of different disciplines.
Yeah.
That's what we call behavioral science. But you hear me all the time talking about biology, chemistry.
Yeah.
Right? Well, I dropped biology in college. I failed a year of chemistry that I had to retake to be able to get a D. Okay. But I talk a lot about biology and chemistry, and I'm, pretty on point. Right. And so I'm this mix of things that came.
Right.
And by the way, you know what? Actually, I think that's what a really good RevOps person looks like. I think a really good RevOps person has done a breadth and depth. I think that there is a generalist nature that begins to build. Now, what are the elements that I think are crucially important to a strategic RevOps function? I think critical thinking is major. I think a deep curiosity. So it's insatiable, but it's also way below the surface level. I think you have to have a systems mind. You have to see patterns. You have to think holistically. So I don't think anyone can be a head of RevOps. And I'll tell you something else you have to be. You know what? I think you have to be a little bit of a son of a bitch, right? Because RevOps is, it's a lot. I mean, I think at the end, that's the place where trade-offs are, I think that's where they fall. And so you're the person that needs to tell, people like to tell me, I tell people their baby's ugly. Which is funny because I actually never think, I never see a business and think, I'm sorry, that's not true. I do see some businesses and I think that's an ugly business. I've never worked with that. If I think that's an ugly business, and I've gone into businesses that are really screwed up. Yeah. Right. And what I see is a beautiful business. I'm like Michelangelo. I just need to, I take away from the stone, and that's where it is. Well, you know what? That's actually RevOps mindset, right? It's being, and so if there's a you can't in the role, you can't be a pleaser. Yeah. Because really, there's a little bit of being an umpire. Like if everybody's a little bit upset with you, then it probably means you did a good job. You are the one that's inflicting change. You are the one that there's those things that come into it that combine. But yeah, so I think smart, critical thinking, which is different from smart. Yeah. A breadth of knowledge and experience mixed with depth, which is also why I think that there aren't a lot of heads of revenue operations in the world today, because it hasn't been around long enough. And so I think as revenue operations builds, there will be that person that starts off at the entry level and then learns and learns, just like we learned how to be strategic sales leaders. But there is, and that's why there's a huge heads of revenue operations today. If you got to hire somebody, the world of RevOps leaders today they happened. They weren't built.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. I like that RFP connection. That's real good. Alrighty. That was a lot. I think the big takeaway that I had was, and it's funny, we always tend to go to, building out business process, and this kind of aligns with that, making sure you have a framework in place when you're defining the role to start is crucial. So you got to start there and build out. I think that was my biggest takeaway.
Yeah, I think outside of revenue operations, I think one of the things that makes building a business so hard is I think most people aren't utilizing a framework, or they've got 17 frameworks they have in mind because they're taking a little of this, a little of that, and they have
Yep.
Which, by the way, is fine if you bring it together into a singular framework. Which you oftentimes find that if you pull from this framework, it can't fit with that other framework.
Right.
But I think when there is a framework, there's something to build to.
Yep.
All right, well, that'll do it for this week. In the words of the famous Texan.
All right.
Fresh from McConaughey.
And that's a wrap on this episode of the RevOps Show. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to go subscribe on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Leave us a review and share the episode. If you have any questions you'd like to ask Doug or Jess, or want to chat about creating a RevOps role in your organization, email me at hannah@imaginellc.com or hit us up on Twitter @demandcreator. Until next time, remember, you can't solve your upstream problems downstream.